Depending on which analyst or commentator's recall of recent Australian political history you're relying on, APEC was either Bob Hawke's idea, one that he pinched from Gareth Evans, who nicked it from a couple of excitable bureaucrats in foreign affairs down in Canberra, or its real architect was one PJ Keating. With the $350 million talk fest of 21 international leaders, accounting for more than half the world's gross domestic product, 70% of this country's trade, and 60% of the globe's energy demands in full swing, earlier this evening here in the studio, I talked with the former Prime Minister about these and other APEC things. Mr Keating, can we clean up an APEC conundrum that's been bugging me? I mean, who actually was the architect of APEC? Because if you read, depending on who you read, Bob Hawke pinched it from Gareth Evans pinched it from public servants. I mean, are you really the Royal Gold architect?
I'm the Royal Gold architect of the APEC leaders meeting.
Right.
Bob is the Royal Gold architect of APEC, the economic meeting.
So I guess we could say this is all your fault then.
Well, this part.
Those people who think the APEC thing is a bit of a farce.
This part of it is, yeah.
Could we talk about some APEC housekeeping?
Sure.
You've been pretty rugged on Sydney-siders who have been moaning and complaining about the inconvenience. You told them to grow up.
Yeah.
Were you serious, or was that a Keatingism?
No, of course I'm serious. I mean, you've been around public life long enough, George, to know the might of the world is here. The United States President, the Chinese President, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Indonesian President, we say, oh no, please don't put us out, to have your discussions. I mean,
but is all the security...
Give us a break.
Is all the security really necessary? I mean, I spoke to Simon Perez last year, and he said he doesn't build fences and walls, he builds bridges.
Well, I belong to that school. I never had a lot of security when I was Prime Minister, but...
It's a different world,
but things have changed, and I can't really make a judgment about that.
So you do think it's probably necessary?
It's probably necessary.
Yep. The rabble-proof fence, it was described as by some card. I mean, how do you feel about the people who feel obliged to protest?
But I'm not sure what they're protesting about. What are they saying? That, freer trade and more trade in the world hasn't lifted a billion Chinese out of poverty? Because it has. Is it not lifting people? I mean, 400 million people, I think, is a number of people who have been lifted out of poverty in Asia in the last decade. I mean, economic growth works, and this may not suit some people, and they're saying it's usury, and we're using,
So there's an area of agreement between you and John Howard, because that's his line.
Yeah, well, I agree with that line.
Yep. You wouldn't deny them the right to protest, though?
Oh, no, they can go for their life, as far as I'm concerned, George. Yep. I've been a bit of a protester myself, of sorts.
You have. In fact, you're an ageing radical as we speak. Could I put it to you this way? That reading what you've said over the last few weeks, leading up to APEC and now while it's on, as you see it, they seem to have lost the plot.
Yeah.
As you put it, a bunch of turkeys who aren't prepared to take on the big issues.
Yeah, I don't think incrementalism in trade policy... APEC, the leaders' meeting, was not designed for that. You get the President of the United States to sit at the table with his counterpart in China and Japan, etc., and Russia, to resolve strategic issues, and there are big ones to be resolved.
But they'd say that's what they're doing. That's what they're going to do.
But they're not, though. They're not. They're just doing the trade. They're doing the sort of... comparatively, they're doing the knitting.
That's distinct from...
from doing really big jobs, So, OK, yes, is there a bit of virtue in, dropping further non-tariff barriers? Well, of course there is. The most important thing about APEC, though, is that it actually exists, that these leaders will meet, that they meet one another. You see, you take George W. Bush and Putin, they'll see each other again. Hu Jintao will see George Bush again. He'll see his Japanese counterpart again. And that just means you get to know a person better.
Yep. One of the things that fascinates me about it is if it was your idea, I've never heard John Howard go along with anything that was your idea. Why is he going along with APEC?
Well, it's such a big... he would never have put the APEC meeting. You can imagine him dealing with... I told the story today. When I was trying to get Li Peng, there was the Chinese premier who presided over the Tiananmen Square massacre, into APEC. He was the premier then, because he said, oh, we won't be there. We won't be there. And I said, you'll be there. You'll be there, because you have to be there. I said, I said, let me get this right. You're going to turn up the opportunity of meeting the American president regularly and the Japanese Prime Minister, who you've never met regularly. I said, you'll be there. Anyway, this was a dinner. So I got a bit, heated, And
who is this upstart taking on the Chinese Premier?
And his wife tuned up and said, Mr. Keating, please have respect for my husband. He has recently had a heart attack. So I got ticked off by the wife for knuckling
But he turned up,
you see.
Can I ask you that you believe, when you've been quoted as saying this, I found this one of the most astounding things I've heard from you for a while. In my opinion, the most seriously dangerous part of the world is not the Middle East, it's North Asia, within the triangle of unresolved tensions between China and Japan and the Northern Peninsula. Now, when you said that, Alexander Downer said, you're unsophisticated, you're playing politics, you're way off the mark, and to suggest that these two countries are on the threshold of going to war is just absurd. Were you suggesting they were going to war?
No, this is see, what he did was exaggerate what I said and then put it down. I mean, but look, with Downer, we've sent a boy on a man's errand for years to try and deal with these countries. Of course, North Asia is the most dangerous part of the world. If you look at Israel and the Palestinians, there's 4.5 million Israelis. There's about 1 million Palestinians. There's 1.3 billion Chinese, and there's 160 million Japanese, and 100 million Koreans, etc. It is weight that causes problems. I mean, when the Nazis hopped into the Russians, it was weight.
They've got the numbers,
and it's the weight of these great states, China and India, and the antipathy between them. The fact that the Japanese have never atoned for their war atrocities in China, and the Chinese have never forgiven
What are you saying we should be saying to them? And can you imagine John Howard and George Bush, or anybody else, any of the other leaders who are here, sitting down and lecturing the Chinese leader, the Japanese leader, about how they ought to behave themselves in their part of the world? I mean,
George, you'd be surprised how
points up again whether APEC really matters.
Yeah, but George, you'd be surprised how far you can get if you try, if you dare to try. How would I have gone? I mean, I remember when I started this thing about the leaders' meeting, we had the little tut-tuts from Foreign Affairs here. Oh, very good Prime Minister, but of course, ambitious, but it'll never happen, it'll never happen. Look, you'd be surprised how much the Chinese and the Japanese would take notice of us,
now?
A middle power. Now. But you've got to have your cards up. You can't be playing a sort of three-card game between the Americans, ourselves and the Japanese, with the Chinese not liking that, and at the same time go to the Chinese and try and enjoin them to do something good. Obviously, you'd have to be the state that has good intentions.
Does it bother you that Kevin Rudd, or can I put it this way, you think he could be a little more equivocal about his support for the US alliance? Because you could almost put this is almost a Keatingism, almost put a cigarette paper between he and John Howard on the American alliance, except when it comes to the staged withdrawal from Iraq. Is he kowtowing a bit?
Well, I made the point the other day, I think what an Australian leader should be doing, I gave the organ analogy, you play the keys in Asia and you pump the pedals in Washington. And that's what a smart government does. What a dumb government does is run... I mean, the Americans do not want sycophants. They want helpers. They want states that help them. They would love to understand this part of the world better, or better, have us manage part of it for them. Instead of that, what John Howard has done has thrown all his eggs in the Washington basket and said, me too, we're with you, we're with you.
You're confident that Kevin Rudd will be different?
Oh, I think he's different, because Kevin understands the East Asian hemisphere better than John Howard does, and he's not inclined to compromise Australian national interest simply to serve the interests of Washington.
Can I ask you a question? I don't think I've ever heard you ask this question. What do you feel about Australia and Iraq and our withdrawal from there?
Well, we made a terrible mess of the country. 400 Iraqis died a week before last. If I was John Howard, I would, hang my head in shame about all that. But we made a terrible mess of the place. And there is a kind of moral issue about whether we remain a helper in the Iraq outcome. It's very hard to escape that point.
Should Iraq be discussed at APEC?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because it's not an Asia-Pacific matter. And the other thing, in the great scheme...
But it's an international matter, it's a world matter, it's a global matter.
It can be discussed, but in the great scheme of things, in the weight of states, It's not, again, an issue.
But it's a security matter, and you keep harping on about how this is all about security.
Yeah, I know, it's not security. I tend to think of states in terms of tectonic plates. I mean, the Chinese are a tectonic plate. You know, they're like the things that produce those tsunamis, you know, and the Japanese are a tectonic plate. Iraq is not a tectonic plate.
We could go on. What about climate change? Is that an APEC issue?
It could be an APEC issue, yeah, okay, because it is a big issue. And the APEC, the Asia-Pacific emitters, are a bunch of bad guys when it comes to emissions, and therefore it is a useful thing to do.
Good to see you again. Good to talk. Cheers.
Bye.
The incorrigible PJ Keating, never a man damned with faint self-praise on the origins and the future of APEC. Coming up, desperate attempts in the US to get kids off the drug ice.
I'm an addict. Like, I don't know, it just seems like I can never get rid of it. Like, it's going to be with me until I die.